So, Constitution Day is September the 17th. So, we're going to take a couple of days here to kind of focus on the Constitution and what that means and why that's important to us now, even though these are things that happened a really long time ago. So, we've got some people here that are going to help us out with that. So, these two just learned a lot of interesting facts about how the American government was formed. And government just means the people that make the rules and the laws here in the United States, and they're going to share what they learned. So, when our founding fathers met in 1787, when they say founding fathers, they just mean the people that were building up the United States. The United States has not always been a country. We've been talking about Native Americans. Obviously, people lived here before we lived here, right? So, the founding fathers are the people from England that came over and started to found the United States and their government. They had a huge task in front of them. They knew they wanted to draft a new document that would grant each citizen of the newly formed states freedoms that they had never known before. So, and we'll talk about this later, but part of the reason that people came to the United States in the first place, or what is now the United States, is because they didn't like how things were being run in their home countries. So they decided to come here, and they wanted to make sure that they had a document meaning just a paper that says, here is what each person is granted. Here is what each person's freedoms may be. And this document is known as the Constitution. And if you look right here, you've probably seen We the People or something like that. This is the start of the Constitution. So our founding fathers knew they did not want another king to lead our country. So kings were very popular during this time in a lot of countries. And kings aren't chosen leaders. Those are people that are just born into it. So they decided they didn't want that to happen. They decided how much power and authority they did want their federal government to have. And federal government means over the entire country, not by state, but by country. And what they wanted it to look like. So they felt like people needed more choice. They didn't just get what they were handed to them, okay? But why no king? They didn't want one man or one group to have too much authority. Authority here means power. They felt if one man had absolute control, it might lead to a dictatorship, like they experienced under the rule of the British king. So in this case, the king made all of the rules, and if you didn't like it, then you were punished for not following the directions of what they did. They didn't have anybody else that they talked to. The people that lived in the country had no say. It was just one person that made up all of the rules, and they did not like that. So King George III, he was the king of Great Britain who repeatedly unfairly taxed these American colonists. So the people that first started living here after the Native Americans were some colonists from Great Britain or England, and King George was not very kind to them, and we're definitely going to talk about that later in social studies, but they did not like how they were being treated. They didn't want America to have the possibility of having an unfair leader like King George. They didn't like what was going on in their own country. They didn't want it happening here in the new one they were creating. So our founding fathers also realized there was a definite need for a strong centralized government. So they felt like we needed a government that could help us, set things into place, make sure everybody was receiving the things that they should receive. How did they know that? Before the Constitution was written, there was a document called the Articles of Confederation, and that's the document, that was what they used to, those were kind of like the rules to live by, kind of like how we have a classroom agreement here. The Articles of Confederation was like the agreement at that time. Living according to those rules taught them the lessons that they did need to bring in a strong central government. What were the problems with the Articles of Confederation? Just like when you guys write, you write a first draft, a second draft. The first time you wrote your personal narrative, not always the best, right? There are some things that need to be fixed, and that's what was happening here with the Articles of Confederation. So overall, the states just had too much power, and at this time, the states were almost acting like small countries themselves. They all had very different ideas, or the colonies had very different ideas of how they wanted things to be run, and there wasn't a lot of unity, which means that not everybody was kind of on the same page, not everybody was thinking the same things. So most states had their own military. Some states started making agreements with foreign governments. Each state printed its own money, so there was no stable economy, which means that if you lived in Georgia, you would have your own money, and if you lived in Kentucky, you would have your own money. So it was really hard to build one big economy. or how, goods and services were traded and money, because everybody was kind of doing their own thing. The states refused to financially support the federal government, so they didn't have enough money. And the states of 10 argued among themselves. So they didn't have, a powerful form of government or somebody that could kind of help listen to the problems they were having and help them solve these things. So through the Constitution, our founding fathers designed a rather elaborate plan for the federal government of the United States. So the first thing they decided to do, because they didn't want one branch to have, or one person to have, too much responsibility, they decided to split the government into 3 different sections. So each branch, what we call a branch, just meaning like, think of a tree, how like the branches will go in different directions. So this is starting from the tree of the United States, and it was branching off into 3 different pieces. So each of those branches had different responsibilities, but they all had to work together to make sure that the country would run smoothly. And they did this, they wrote a system of what's called checks and balances, and we'll talk about that more later. But for right now, we're going to pause here. We're going to watch a quick brain pop video, and then we'll hop right back into this where we've left off.